So as I stated before, May 23rd, 2007 was the first time in the history of human beings that more people lived in urban areas than rural areas. And so that means that there are nearly 3.3 billion urbanites in the world today. Of those, 1 billion people live in what we call urban slums. So what is a slum? One of the things about the term urban slum to some people can be offensive. However, we're going to use it in the term of just thinking of the most low income areas of an urban area. And so not always do they have the same conditions from place to place. They definitely vary from, for example, from Indianapolis to Nairobi, Kenya, much different versions of the lower income area of an urban area. So let's be safe and let's use the UN's definition of a slum. And they define a slum as a group of individuals living under the same roof in an urban area who lack one or more of the following: durable housing, sufficient living space, easy access to safe water, access to adequate sanitation, and security of tenure. The problem with all of these are they're quite vague. What I think is sufficient, you might think is not sufficient living space. What is durable housing? What do you mean by easy access to safe water? What's easy? And so it's very vague terms. I think spell out the fact that this is a very difficult term to perfectly define. But we're once again going to look at the developed versus developing, where there's definitely contrast between urban slum conditions from place to place. And so generally, urban slums, we refer to them as crowded, often informal neighborhoods in urban areas. And so once again, we're using vague terms, but we'll spell this out in some clear ways as we look at some videos and some pictures. And these are going to be people of the lowest incomes who are grouped in the same or near each other in the same location. Often these are the least desirable locations. And so we've talked about this before when we looked at the concentric ring model and the sector model. And so there you saw the low-income individuals living closer to the pollution of industry and the congestion and the difficulty of having a railroad coming through and you know having the odd hours being woken up to the loud rumbling of the trains. Also in floodplains would be other areas of not desirable locations, because obviously if you're prone to having your area flooded, that can be quite disadvantageous. And so we're going to look at some examples of urban slums in developed and developing countries. So some living condition characteristics: unsafe housing, and so housing that's not durable during weather or fire events. And so we'll take a look at some examples. Very crowded, oftentimes lacking ventilation. And so we looked at previously why there's so many people who die in urban areas of heat stroke. One of the factors is there's not much wind and ventilation that comes through a dense cluster of individuals living in an urban area like downtown or near downtown, compared to the rural countryside where there's all those the breezes that you're accustomed to feeling out there. Also lacking tenure, and that just means you don't own the place, and so you're kind of left up to the landlord and the other tenants in a complex. And so you might be able to take care of your place, but if the neighbor or someone near you uses too much grease in their dinner, and all of a sudden then they torch the place, and then boom, you get to deal with that. Obviously negative. Poor sanitation, we're going to look at some examples of this, but one of the things, especially in developing countries, is issues regarding human waste. And so what happens is you do not see the luxurious situation we have where we just push a button and all of our cares go away. Here, it's one of the daily issues they have to deal with is getting rid of their human waste. And so oftentimes they put it in marshlands or in rivers because for them that's the best way to get rid of the problem, send it downstream. However, these areas often are prone to flooding, so you can just imagine what would happen if their area flooded. I'll let you just use your imagination there. And so then that also is illustrative of the unsafe water condition, drinking water, cleaning, and so obviously water fundamental to life. And so if just imagine your water supply contains feces, disease, and so here you're more likely to have the early stages of the epidemiological transition, which we've talked about before. And so here you're more likely to die from infectious diseases. And so here we look at the biggest issues are things that we don't even deal with here anymore. And so here individuals die of diarrhea. And various other waterborne diseases. Also, air pollution is a big problem because, once again, these aren't the most desirable areas of a city. And so they're often near industry, near factories, near very high polluted areas, both water but also air. Finally, crime. And so one of the things, I'm not going to justify crime at all, but you can understand crime when you're at the bottom of the income spectrum. And so if you're unemployed, you have children, you might not have access to some funds, then you're going to get creative. I'm not justifying crime at all, but we can somewhat understand it, especially amongst lower income individuals. And so let's take a quick snapshot of Indianapolis Census 2000 poverty level. For one person was $8,350 a year, and up to 2, 3, and so on. And so let's take a look at some patterns, and you definitely notice a inner city, a pattern where those areas that are near downtown, the areas that are part of what we call Center Township, that middle rectangle in this image here, you can see that there's a higher amount of individuals who are below the poverty line. And so we can see that these are for Marion County, for Indiana, for Indianapolis. This would be an example of where lower income individuals are clustering. We'll come back and talk more about this a little bit later. This here is a dot map, also somewhat of a proportional symbol map, because what this is showcasing is every single dot is a murder, and areas that had multiple murders have larger dots. And so you definitely see a pattern, and there's more of a clustering inside 465, especially near downtown, on kind of the outer edges of it. But as you can go further away, you notice that regarding murders, and this was, I believe, 2008, decreases once you get further away from the central city. And so we can see crime being higher. And so that going along with what we've been talking about beforehand as far as characteristics of these lower income areas. All right, let's return our focus to developing countries. And so we've shown this before that by far the most amount of growth that's occurring right now is occurring in urban areas, and especially in urban areas in developing countries. And this trend is only going to continue. In 1950, 17% of the population living in the less developed or the developing world lived in cities. Today, or more closer to today, I should say, 42%. So that's probably getting very close to 50% by now. Looking at urban populations living in slums, we once again notice a particular pattern. And so when we look at as far as developing country slums, we can see Africa big time. But also there's pockets throughout Asia for sure. Even Beijing, China has several areas of slums that are kind of squatter settlements, as they're also known. And so there's definitely a pattern here that's very much comparable to a lot of other maps we've looked at. And then there's a guy named Mike Davis, a geographer from somewhere in the West Coast, I forget where. But he mapped out the top 30 largest slums. He called these the mega slums. And so Mexico City actually is the award winner for having the largest slum. And so we also see on the map, if you look in Africa, the NA, that's one place that we're going to look at here in a few minutes. And then if you look in India, MU, another place in which we're going to look at. So we're going to look at two of the world's 30 largest